Today, we're going to talk about one of my most popular topics on my channel, the levels of consciousness, from the book Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. Just by watching this video or paying attention to the levels of consciousness, you will raise your level of consciousness. What does that mean? It simply means that you're going to come from a place of power instead of force, just by becoming aware of it. Why do we want to come from a place of power? Because power is effortless, it goes unseen and unsuspected. Force is experienced through the senses, the five senses that we have. Power can be recognized only through inner awareness. Facts are accumulated by effort, but truth reveals itself effortlessly. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Kathie Owen. I have been a certified fitness trainer and certified life coach since 2002. On this channel, we talk about having a growth mindset, healthy habits, entrepreneurship, fitness, and even some reality transurfing. And today we are covering the levels of consciousness from the book Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. This is one of my most popular topics, and I can really see why. It's because just by becoming aware of these levels, you raise your level of consciousness. And today we're going to go over each level. And I have found that in the past, a lot of people are coming from a place of force. And as you become aware of these levels, you will start to see where power is taking place and where force is taking place. Recently, I did a blog post on power versus force marketing, and I had someone approach me on Instagram with force marketing, and force marketing is out there everywhere. But what we really want to do is we want to come from a place of power. Power is flow based. The universe favors power. It says so in the book, and I can tell you from experience that power is favored. When you're coming from a place of force, you're trying too much effort, you're putting too much into it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Here lately, I've noticed a common thread going on in my world, and it's something that I know my subconscious needs to address. And what's happened is a lot of my clients, a lot of my prospects, a lot of my friends are focused on what I call effort based key performance indicators. This means that they're focused on trying to get numbers on their YouTube channel. They're trying to get followers on their Instagram. They're trying to make people want to market with them. And when you come from a place of force, it's not going to work as easy as it comes from a place of power. When you come from a place of power, you are working from a place of integrity, number one. Number two, you're also coming from a place where you're building a relationship. You're not focused on, oh my gosh, I got to put out reels so I can get more followers. That makes absolutely no sense to me, because what's going to happen is, yeah, you might get more followers or you might get enough subscribers that you can monetize your channel. But what is going to happen is that's going to be coming from a place of force. And those people that follow you or those people that start watching you may not be your ideal customer. And so, therefore, it's not building a relationship. So, it's almost like in dating, you start getting people that don't relate to what you're talking about. And therefore, well, you got the numbers, but what's the quality of that? And the quality of that comes from your key performance indicators, which I like to come from a place of power instead of force. So let's get into the different levels. We're going to start with force levels. And shame is at the very bottom of the levels of consciousness. And shame is an energy level of 20. In the book, he says that shame produces neurosis. It's destructive to psychological and mental health. As a consequence of low self esteem, it makes one prone to the development of physical illness. Shame is used as a tool of cruelty, and victims often become cruel themselves. Th- This what's happened when the victimizer cycle that I talk about all the time on my channel. I'll have a link in the show notes and the description to an entire list of articles that I've written about the victimizer cycle. But I will put a picture of the victimizer cycle on the screen right now. And if you're following on my podcast, you can just go look at these articles, or you can just picture this in your mind. But the victimizer cycle is a triangle. And at the bottom of the triangle, you have the victim on one side and the victimizer on the other side. And what happens is we enter this victimizer cycle. And I'd like you to picture an argument in your mind right now. You're going to have a victim in the argument, and you're going to have a victimizer in the argument. And I often remember my wonderful therapist telling me one time, whenever you watch an argument, who is the bigger fool in that argument? You've got the victim and the victimizer. And the only way out of that, because it becomes a vicious cycle at the bottom of that triangle, there's a circle 8. That is a vicious cycle. You go from victim to victimizer. And that's what I'm talking about. In shame, you use cruelty because it's been used so long against you. And the only way out of that victimizer cycle is to get into one of the levels of power, and it's called victor. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But oftentimes, when people are in shame, it leads them to feel justified for their cruelty, and it produces a false pride, anger, and guilt. And which leads to the next level, which is guilt. And guilt is a domination or preoccupation with sin. And religious demagogues who use guilt as a control, and that's you can see that across the board. And those in the level of guilt are obsessed with punishment and are likely acting out their own guilt or projecting it onto others. Guilt is pretty prominent in the book Reality Transurfing. And I love how Vadim addresses guilt, because Vadim Zeland is the author of Reality Transurfing. And he says that guilt can really, it's like a cancer. It can just build up and go and build off of the energy that it's built up. And when you're in guilt, the only way out of it is to apologize once, sincerely apologize, and let it go. Otherwise, it will build up on you. And that is from the book Reality Transurfing, where he talks about that. I've done an episode on guilt, and I'll have a link in the show notes and the description below. The next level we have is apathy, and the energy level is 40. And remember, we're still in force. So poverty, despair, and hopelessness is in this level. And the world in the future looks bleak to the one who is vibrating at this energy level. There's a state of helplessness. There's needy in every way, and lack not only of resources, but also of energy. This is easy to spot. Whenever somebody says, oh, I'm tired, or they're not moving. And I did an episode on what is called functional fitness, because functional fitness helps you alleviate this level right here, because you need to get movement in your day. And if you don't get movement in your day, you're going to lack energy, and you're going to lack resources, like this is talking about. And you become in a place of poverty, despair, and helplessness, which doesn't have to be there. And again, to get out of these lower levels of consciousness, we need to get into power. So when we started talking about the power levels, start associating with the ones that resonate with you. The next level is grief, and grief is at the level 75. There's sadness, loss, and despondency. They resonate at this level. And most humans have felt this at some point in time in their life. And I talk about this all the time, especially when it comes to the term toxic positivity. because positivity is not toxic. And if you view it as toxic, then you're already bringing yourself down into this level. But instead, what it is forced positivity. You're forcing positivity on somebody who is in this level of grief. And like Dr. David Hawkins mentions in the book, we've all experienced grief at some point in time in our life. And yeah, it's uncomfortable, but that's what's good about living from a place of flow, because when you're in a place of flow, you don't see the uncomfortable as uncomfortable. It's just a different way of thinking. But in the levels of grief, there's chronic mourning and bereavement and remorse about the past. One sees sadness everywhere, and sadness of little children, sadness of world conditions, sadness of life itself. But this colors one's entire vision of existence. And you see this in the news. I have a friend that just watches the news like crazy, and she's always telling me, "Did you see this? Did you see that?" And she brings that into my awareness. So therefore, I've got to come come to terms with that. And it's almost funny. It's like she identifies that she's doing that, because she'll tell me in the conversation. At the end of the conversation, she goes, "Oh, but I have a positive mindset. And I'm trying to keep this online." And I'm like, "Well, okay, you just brought this to my awareness. And now I've got to ho'oponopono on all of that you just shared with me. And you just justified yourself for telling me all of these negative things and bringing that grief into my awareness." But that's how you deal with the levels of consciousness that are in the levels of force. You will bring it into your awareness and you heal it with whatever method works for you. That could be therapy. That could be, like I mentioned, Ho'oponopono. I practice Ho'oponopono on my food, on my day, on my work, on my business. And it just is a way of living that will bring you back into power. Of course, after we interfere, we have the next level, which most people resonate with, and that is fear. And that is at an energy level of 100. And this is rampant in the world right now. The fear of danger is actually healthy. Then Dr. David Hawkins lists the fears, and they're similar to the fears that Napoleon Hill brings up in Think and Grow Rich. We have fear of enemies, fear of old age, fear of rejection, and a multitude of social fears that dominate most people's lives. Once fear becomes one's focus, the endless fearful events feed it. Fear becomes obsessive and can take any form. Fear of loss of a relationship can lead to jealousy and a chronically high stress level. Fear is contagious and can become a dominant social trend. I don't even need to tell you that. All you got to do is look at the news, fear porn on steroids, because it's dominant and it is contagious. And you need to protect your awareness from those things, because it's going to come into your awareness. And the more you become aware of it, the more it's likely to come into your world. But power is the way out of it. And we're going to talk about power in a moment. We're still in the lower levels of consciousness. It takes energy to rise above fear, and the oppressed are unable to reach a higher level unaided. Thus, the fearful seek a leader who escaped the fear to lead them out of their slavery. And that is from the book Power versus Force. So, where is your power? Where does your energy come from? And once you start to understand the levels of power, you'll start to see, oh, okay, that's where I was going into fear. It was brought to my awareness, and this is how I'm going to get out of it. Desire is the next energy level, and it calibrates at a level of 125. Desire motivates vast areas of human activity, including the economy. Desire is a level of addiction and creates a craving more important than life itself. What? Yeah. It creates a craving more important than life itself. The habit loop and the craving, this is where it lies. And That comes from the book Power of Habit. And I've done a video on it as well. But the habit loop and the craving, this is where the addictive habit can become so difficult to get out of, even why it can lead to death. Yes, because it becomes more important than life itself. That's why the habit is so instilled in there, but you're becoming from a place of desire. Desire can lead to accumulation and greed. It becomes insatiable. You can't satisfy it because it is an ongoing energy field and leads to more and more and more. And the victims of desire may actually be unaware of the basis of their motives. Yeah. The next energy level is anger, and it is calibrates at a level of 150. Anger can lead to constructive or destructive action. As people move out of apathy level and grief to overcome fear, they begin to desire and want. Desire leads to frustration, as we just saw, but anger can be a fulcrum into which the oppressed eventually become free. But anger is still in force, and anger can lead to resentment and revenge. Volatile and very dangerous. Frustration results from exaggerated importance of desires. So, importance is huge in reality transurfing. We want to keep importance low. What happens when you make something super important? You put it up on a pedestal and it goes way up there, and therefore it starts to crumble. It just comes down. And when you keep importance low or reduce importance to a healthy level, then you're not going to feel the frustration that results in exaggerated importance. Anger leads to hatred, which has erosive effect on all areas of a person's life. Yes, anger leads to hatred, which has an erosive effect on all areas of a person's life. It's like in the song Humble and Kind, and I wrote about this in my book, The Truth Bubbles Up. There's a line in the song where he says, "Don't hold on to resentment because it will keep you from flying." In all areas of your life, it will prevent you from flying. I've seen it happen so many times. So we want to let go of that. And of course, when we get to the levels of power, we'll talk about how to do that. And the next and final level of force is pride, and it calibrates at a level of 175. Pride goeth before the fall is the quote. And pride is defensive and vulnerable, and it is dependent on external conditions. Pride remains weak because it can be knocked off its pedestal. Just like importance in reality transurfing, it can be knocked off its pedestal. Why? Because its foundation is weak. It is defensive and vulnerable. When it's defensive and vulnerable, it's easily knocked off its pedestal. Pride is divisive, and it gives rise to factionalism. And the consequences are costly. Man has habitually died for pride. Arrogance and denial are in pride, and they block your growth. Pride is a sizable block to real power. So how does one get to power? Well, guess what? The next level is the first level of power, and it's courage, and it calibrates at a level of 200. And this is where power first appears. It distinguishes the positive and the negative influences of life. At the level of courage, attainment of true power occurs. Empowerment. It's a zone of exploration and accomplishment, fortitude, and determination. So when I start thinking of courage, I start thinking of those people who really want those followers or who need to build their YouTube channel so they can start monetizing. They're working from a place of force. But when you start to come from courage, you're going to act from a level of exploration, from accomplishment, from fortitude and determination. And when you start to have courage, that means you're going to start getting consistent and persistent with your content. You don't just put out a reel so it'll go viral and get all your followers. You don't just talk about, oh my gosh, I'm going to have this lady on my podcast because she has 12 million followers. But the lady that got those 12 million followers actually had courage. And that is the part that is missing in these components where people are like, I have to get this many followers. Where's your courage? Your courage is what's going to get you to the next level. So you start exploring, you start having accomplishments, and you start acknowledging those accomplishments. You have fortitude and you have empowerment and you have determination. People put back as much energy as they take. Oh my gosh, I'm going to repeat that. People put back as much energy as they take. So take the person who wants those followers to grow their channel so it monetizes. Well, what are you giving to get back? And what kind of quality is that gift? This is where productivity begins. And then your accomplishments start to result in positive feedback. So instead of just getting followers, you get quality followers. You start magnetizing people who need what you have to offer instead of magnetizing 12 million people, which probably most of those don't need what you have to offer. But you went viral. But what's the quality of those people that are following you now? The next energy level and the power levels is neutrality, and it calibrates at a level of 250. At this level, you rise above barriers that dissolve one's energies. It's flexible and non-judgmental. It's realistic appraisal of problems. It's unattached to outcomes. Not getting one's way is no longer experienced as defeating, frightening, or frustrating. Here we go again. We're rising above the barriers that dissolve one's energies. And it's flexible and non-judgmental. So take the person who wants to start monetizing their channel and they're only at 20, 40 followers on their channel. Well, at this point, like I told this client, your KPI is not equal to what you're trying to do. You become neutral to the fact of your followers and you start providing a higher quality of service towards what you're trying to achieve. You're non-judgmental about it because when you're going, oh, I need to get to 5,000 followers and I'm only at 40, that's not a good judgment to look at because it's not flexible. And it's also not something you can control, but you can control your attitude, your performance, your consistency, your persistency. Those things you can control, but you can't control how many followers you're going to get, which is a terrible KPI in my opinion. When you are in neutrality, it's the beginning level of inner confidence, of sensing your own power, and you're not easily intimidated. So your confidence comes from here. You start to build off of that confidence and you own your own sense of inner power. So you could probably go back to some of my early videos and see where I didn't have my power because I hadn't been consistent enough yet. Once I started getting consistent, I started finding my little nook. And then therefore I got consistent and persistent. I built confidence and you can sense my own inner power that's coming from a place of power instead of force. And at this level also, one is not driven to prove anything. Like for example, I don't need to prove anything. I find everything working to my advantage. And that is another reality transurfing principle that we talk about. So say, for example, I was at that 40 followers on my YouTube channel, which I really don't use that as a KPI. I use who I'm magnetizing to me and who is learning from me and the feedback that I get from them. But if I was looking at my KPIs on my numbers, I might be dissatisfied. I might lose my confidence. I might go, oh, I might as well just quit. I can't overcome this little bounce of numbers. But that's not a good way to judge it. And that's definitely not something you can control, number one. And number two, it's not a good way to build your confidence because it's coming from a place of force instead of power. When we calibrate at the level of neutrality, this person is safe to be around because this person is not interested in conflict, competition, or guilt. I'm going to repeat this. The person in neutrality is not worried about competition, or they're not worried about conflict, and they're also not worried about guilt. Remember, guilt is something that is used to shame others. So, like, maybe you should feel guilty that you only have 40 followers on your YouTube channel. That is, again, not something you can control. Controlling the controllables is another video that I did that is exactly on coming from a place of neutrality. The next level on the levels of power is willingness. It's an energy calibration of 310. This is positive energy and may be seen as the gateway to the higher levels of flow. I talk about flow on my channel all the time because once you make flow a priority, once you start living a flow-based life, you start to see synchronicities everywhere and everything comes into your world the way it's supposed to. Once you hit this level of willingness, you have overcome inner resistance to life. You're open-minded, and below the level of 200, you are closed-minded. But you're genuinely friendly. So those who operate from a willingness level, they're genuinely friendly, social, and economic success tends to follow. They're not troubled by unemployment and will find a way. They'll just find a way. A lot of entrepreneurs resonate at this level because as an entrepreneur, you build relationships for your business if you're coming from a place of an integrity. At this level, they're naturally helpful to others and contribute to the good of society. They are willing to face inner issues and do not have major learning blocks. They bounce back from adversity and learn from experience. So Napoleon Hill talks about this all the time. You learn from failure. Failure is going to happen along the way of success. How do you frame that failure? Do you bounce back from adversity? And this level, you tend to be self-correcting and willing to look at own defects and learn from others. The next level on the levels of power is acceptance, and it calibrates at a level of 350. So major transformation takes place at this level. And another thing is responsibility comes into play. Responsibility gets a bad rap. You hear me say it all the time. But take this, for example, start looking at responsibility and taking responsibility for everything in your life. Because when you start taking responsibility in your life, you start to come from a place of acceptance, number one, which is exactly what we're talking about right now. But number two, you start to have control over your circumstances. You start to have control over the things that you were trying to blame on somebody else or trying to come from a different place, and take your responsibility and you take your power back. All the levels below 200 tend to be powerless and they see themselves as victims and they are at the mercy of life. At acceptance, you take your power back. The true source of happiness is within yourself, and that's where your power lies. And nothing so-called out there has the power to make one happy or make one sad. Love is not something that is taken away, but it's created within. Emotional calm and perception is widened, and denial is transcended. So the narcissist lives from a place of denial, projection, and distortion. We all have narcissistic tendencies in us, and narcissistic tendencies are in the levels of force. But now we're talking in the levels of power. So you have acceptance, you have emotional calm, and perception is widened, and denial is transcended because you don't have denial, because the opposite of denial is responsibility. The lower levels of consciousness, the force levels, they are rigid, but acceptance is free of discrimination and intolerance. It includes rather than rejects. You don't have to be right all the time. It lets go and it accepts others for what they are. And your situations and circumstances and environment, they're all accepted for what they are. The next level of consciousness is reason. And reason calibrates at a level of 400, and it's capable of handling large, complex amounts of data, which happens in flow. It makes rapid and correct decisions. I feel like this level comes from a level of listening to your intuition. Follow your heart and intuition, for it somehow knows the way. This is where reason is. This is exactly where reason is. Because when you follow your intuition, your decisions come quick and easy, and you know that they're the right thing to do. And plus, the synchronicities show up and everything just shows up at the right time. This level of energy is the level of science and medicine. And let me point this out here, and I did this in my last video as well, is Vadim Zeland, the author of Reality Transurfing, was a quantum physicist. And I believe his book, Reality Transurfing, resonates at a level of 400 for the reason of, number one, he was a scientist, and number two, he started blacklisting people from talking about his book, from teaching the concepts of his book, which just rattles my mind because I don't understand that. It's almost like he feels like he's the one that owns that material and has to be able to decide who can teach it or not. And that is coming from a place of reason because his concepts are brilliant. They are one of the best self-help books I've ever read. But then once I got familiar with the author and the way he hoards his material, I guess you could say, it feels like it's coming from a level of reason. And actually, Dr. David Hawkins says in the book, which was written before Reality Transurfing, he says that the great books of the Western world calibrate at this level. They calibrate at the level of reason. And I totally see that. Now, in a moment, we'll discuss some books that calibrate at a higher level. Like the Bible, it calibrates at a higher level. But when you focus from a level of reason, or you're calibrating at this level, you can lose sight of the forest for the trees, because reason disregards context and discernment to the critical point of a complex issue. Again, I'll mention Vadim blacklisting people because he disregards context and discernment. Why did he blacklist Aaron Doughty? That doesn't make any sense. I feel like he blacklisted Renee Garcia because of their political tension, their opposing tension, maybe. And Hawkins goes further to say that transcending this level of reason is relatively uncommon. And I think it was relatively uncommon back in the year that he wrote this book, because the more that we go through the struggles that our world goes through, I think people are transcending higher and higher and higher as well. And back when he wrote the book, and I can't remember exactly when, I know it came across my awareness in 2008, I believe it was. So it was before a lot of the awakenings started happening. So yes, he says in the book only 4% of the world's population have made it to the level of reason. So yeah, I think that's safe to say at that time. I think now, and we're fixing to go to the higher levels, I think you'll even see that people are resonating higher and higher. Love calibrates at a level of 500, and that's the next level. And love is not really what the world sees as love, which is based on desire, or the lower levels. Remember, desire. And it can lead to possessiveness. It can lead to control, addiction, eroticism, and novelty. We've all been there. Infatuation, and you just get obsessed and you mind screw yourself out of what is that person doing? Where are they? What are they going through? That, once you become aware of this, you're like, well, that's not love. That does not feel good in here. I'm too obsessed with that person. I want to be possessive. I want to be in control. I'm become addicted to that person, and it leads to nothing but desire, which is not love. Oftentimes, this will reveal an underlying anger and dependency that it had masked, which is called attachment. You become attached to the person. Then all of a sudden, they abandon you, and you're left with that desire, and you're like, where does all this go? But when you have true unconditional love, it's unchanging and it's permanent. It never changes. And it's a work to really reach that love, because as humans, We start with infatuation. That's what drives us at the very beginning. That's desire. But then we level out once we hit unconditional love, because unconditional love means you can accept that person's shadow. You can accept what's going on, because when you're infatuated, you don't see the shadows that are going to come up, because every single one of us has a shadow or a part of us that we don't show at first when we are infatuated. Then those things slowly come into play, and it's whether you can accept them or not. Love is a state of being. Just like flow is a state of being, it's a mental state of mind. It's a way of relating to the world that is forgiving, it is nurturing, and supportive. It is forgiving, nurturing, and supportive. It has the capacity to lift others up and accomplish great feats because of its purity of motive. Mother Teresa resonated at this, saints resonated at this level. And that's because it has the capacity to lift others up and accomplish great feats because of its purity of motive. It doesn't have a motive or an intent for anything of desire. It doesn't have a motive or an intent of desire. It is pure and complete. And the next level of consciousness on the levels of power is joy, and it calibrates at a level of 540. This is not the sudden joy of a pleasurable turn of events. It is a constant accompaniment to all activities. Joy arises from within each moment of existence rather than from any external source. So picture this, you've got a wonderful vacation coming up, and that's all you can think about. And then once you get to the vacation, you feel the joy. But you don't feel it the entire time. Something happens, you get sick or whatever. And then you're like, where did all that go? And then your vacation's over, then you're back to work. And you're like, I'm not going to be happy until I get my next vacation. But a person who calibrates at a level of joy is happy doing mundane events, going to work every day. They still experience that joy. They can look forward to their vacation, but they can experience them at the same level. It just comes into the same place. Everything happens effortlessly by synchronicity. By synchronicity. I have to mention this right here because synchronicities are everywhere. And usually what happens is we don't see those synchronicities because we're too wrapped up in the levels of force or even the lower levels of power. But once you get into the higher levels, synchronicities are everywhere. And those things are so cool because what happens is the world and everything in it is seen as a place of divinity. It's seen as a place of pure love. It's amazing. One sense of responsibility for others at this level is of a different quality. So there is a desire to use one state of consciousness for the benefit of life itself rather than particular individuals. I have to mention Joseph Rodriguez at this point because I swear he's calibrating from a level of joy. What is so cool about him? He is my mentor. He has, as of today, when I'm recording this, he's about to hit 500 podcast episodes, and they are brilliant across the board. But he releases his mind map to that. He doesn't worry about you teaching it. He doesn't worry about me teaching it. Sometimes I'll take some of his mind maps and build off of it. But he encourages that. And to me, there's some people out there that hoard their information. Oh, no, can't share this. I can't share this, or somebody's going to steal it, or they worry about people stealing their course material and teaching it when Joseph knows this. He knows in his heart this is coming from him and his higher being and his place of power. Because he knows that, he knows he doesn't have to worry about somebody else teaching it, which is this exact spot we're talking about. What happens in this level is the capacity to love many people simultaneously and love the information you're sharing and freely share it. And it's accompanied by the discovery that the more one loves, the more one can love. The more one gives, the more one can give. I feel like he knows that this is infinite information. There's infinite power coming from what he's teaching, and nobody can take that. So near-death experiences happen at this level as well. People experience this in near-death experiences. And the book Embraced by the Light is all about a near-death experience. And he actually did a calibration of that book, and it calibrates at a level of 595, which comes super close to the next level we're going to talk about. But I just love how that calibrates there. And I feel like Joseph's material calibrates at that level as well. And the next level of energy is peace. And peace is transcendent. It's realization, it's God consciousness. It's extremely rare too. It's only in saints. And I said Mother Teresa earlier, but I guarantee you she calibrated at this level. Formal religion is transcended at this level, and it is to be replaced with pure spirituality, out of which all religion originates. And I have felt this level before, the peace that passeth all understanding. I was raised on Christianity, the Bible, but at some point in time, I got to a place where I saw, whoa, there are things that transcend this formal religion of Christianity. It actually transcends it. And not from a place of judgment either. It's like, oh, okay, this is a great, honestly, it's a great foundation to build off of. Christianity is a great foundation to build off of because it calibrates very high. And the Bible calibrates, I think it calibrates at the next level that we're fixing to talk about. But like he says, formal religion is transcended and it's to be replaced with pure spirituality. That's where peace lies. He says this in the book here. This is pretty cool. Infinite silence in the mind, which has stopped conceptualizing, calibrates at this level. That happens in meditation. It happens when you transcend religion and you transcend it past even spirituality. It's you can't even describe it with words. It's like the situations that I encountered in my book, how my relationship with my boys transcended the physical level. You can't explain it with words. Just saying. The next level is enlightenment, and it is a level of 700. People in enlightenment no longer experience individual personal self as separate from others, and it transcends the ego. The great avatars for whom the title Lord is appropriate: Lord Krishna, Lord Buddha, and Lord Jesus Christ. They calibrate at this level, which is the highest level you can calibrate that was written in this book. So they no longer experience a personal self as separate from others, and it transcends the ego. Wow. So reality transurfing and power versus force, I'm just going to touch on this real quick at the end of this episode. And guilt is at the lowest level. Vadim Zeland talks about guilt a lot in the book, and I remember distinctly just going, how great that felt. Oh, all I need to do is apologize sincerely one time and let it go, because guilt will eat you up inside. Anger at the level of 150. Importance is at anger. Importance of oneself, importance of an object, importance of something else is calibrated at this level, and also at the level of desire. There's pride at the level of 175, which means you are getting knocked off that pedestal when you hold pride for something that is worldly based. The world of Caesar, as Neville Goddard likes to talk about. And then we move into power with neutrality. We find advantage in everything. Advantage is something I teach from reality transurfing. When you find advantage in everything, your world changes. When you find advantage in things that do not seem right, it shifts your consciousness. It shifts the way things work. And then we talked about reason at the level of 400, which is the level of power, which is the level I think the book calibrates at. Reality transurfing calibrates at this level. And Vadim reasons his way into blacklisting others that teach the book. However, Vadim has kind of gone on silence mode in the United States. Because he is in Russia, his Instagram is not open anymore. His contact isn't open anymore. which has really led to a die down of all of that blacklisting topic or conversation, and also die down of Vadim's Instagram profile seemed to really discuss a lot of negative propaganda, which really surprised me. So I was really leaning more towards thinking it was his proteges that were teaching this material on his Instagram profile or wherever he happened to be. All right, this episode turned out pretty long, but this has been one of my most popular videos where I talked about the levels of consciousness and the power versus force. And I think it's good to come back to this and revisit it probably once a year because I probably mentioned this in my first video, but I used to just assume people understood this and knew this. I don't know why I did that, but I just assumed people knew the levels of power versus force, but they don't. And once you become aware of it, just by bringing it into your awareness and paying attention to this, you're already raising your level of consciousness. And maybe perhaps while watching this or listening to this, you could sense me rising through the levels and myself while I'm talking about it. Because when you revisit this, it just brings more power to you, which is a wonderful thing. Another thing I like in the book is he's got a list of words. They're power words and force words because he mentions in the book that just by reading those words, you raise your level of consciousness. Just by reading these words blows my mind. I did a video on a few of those words and how it relates to hearing your intuition. And I'll leave a link to that in the show notes and the description. Anyways, that's my episode for today. I hope you liked it as much as I enjoyed recording this, and I trust that you found it helpful. If you know someone who can benefit from this, please share it with them. Thank you for spending part of your day with me, and until next time, I will see you next time. Peace out and namaste.